What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to FudgeMuppet. This is the Elder Scrolls podcast. I'm Scott, here with Michael and Drew, as always, and today we are discussing High King Wulfharth, also known as Ysmir Wulfharth, Dragon of the North, Breath of Kine, Shaw's Tongue, the Grey Wind, the Storm of Kine, the Kingmaker, the Ash King, and possibly the Underking. We'll get into all of his many names and where he got them from, but I reckon we should start with the most basic stuff. So, who is Ysmir Wulfharth in the beginning?
A king from Atmora.
Yeah.
Essentially. Came to ancient Skyrim, and he was basically all about the Nordic pantheon. And he wanted to reinstall it because Elysia had kind of ruined it for him, and everyone was following the Elysian ways.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, this will all come back to Shaw. You know, that we've talked about before that one of the big things Elysia did when she made her 8 divines pantheon to try and make it so that Nords and Elves could live side by side. One of the key elements of doing that was kind of brushing Shaw under the rug. And traditional Nords aren't big fans of doing that. As we're going to see through Wulfharth's whole life, it's very much intertwined with Lorkhan / Shaw. Yeah.
Well, we can give a little bit of, I'll give some of the broader context. So, obviously, you're looking at early First Era. The Elysian Order's established, and the Elysian Empire, they're hyper-zealous. They've got this whole idea of the One, and they spread this to sort of all corners of their reach, right? And High King Borgus was one that was very, very into the Elysian Order stuff, and he completely sort of got rid of any Nordic pantheon stuff to bring in his Elysian zealotry, essentially, to Skyrim. And as we have talked about previously, especially in the Bosmer episode, King Borgus was killed by the Wild Hunt. And following King Borgus's death, we end up with a war of succession. And during this war of succession, Skyrim's empire starts crumbling. The Nords are driven out of Morrowind. There's lots of stuff going on. But then there is a end of the War of Succession in 420, and Olaf One-Eye is crowned High King of Skyrim. And then so the little dynasty goes on for a bit. We get to Kiorik the White and his son Hogue Merkula, and these were two fellas that were fighting with the Clovian Estates and Rislav Larrick and a bunch of other guys against the Elysian Order once again and their expansion. But we do get Ysmir Wulfharth come into the picture, and afterwards, after Hogue Merkula, but by the way, Hogue Merkula in the Sermons of Vivek is also referred to as Hoaga, mouth of mud, and he was chewing up the ground and I think it was making mud zombie kind of things. It was cool. He sounds way more demonic in that. But basically we get to Ysmir Wulfharth, and he is the truest of true Nords in vibe. He reinstates the Nordic pantheon and gets rid of any Elysian bullshit. And then he basically, he's also known to be a really powerful thumb user. So much so that he had to be sworn into office with scribing. He couldn't say the whatever words.
He couldn't say it with the kind of heroicism that it would need. I think he could whisper it, but then it wouldn't sound too strong. So it was scribed.
Yeah, so it all is that all got scribed. The other thing just to throw out there, and this is only sort of a more so retroactive thing from the times of Skyrim. In Skyrim, it's Jarl Balgraf's brother, I think it is, mentions previous Dragonborns such as King Wulfharth, and that's the line that... So we haven't heard of... Because Dragonborn as sort of this outside of the Septim Dynasty concept wasn't really a thing until the time of Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. That game added a whole bunch of new lore. So retroactively, they've mentioned that Wulfharth was a Dragonborn as well, which would also explain, I guess, why he was such a powerful thumb user.
And not just that, he can learn to use the thumb incredibly easily, kind of like the Dragonborn.
Yeah.
His ability to just watch what happens in one of the songs of Pelennor when the ghost of Alduin is fighting, and kind of just teach himself a dragon shout to kind of reverse age.
Oh, and there's the quote here, too, is, "The shadow of King Borgus had ended for a span. For his zealotry, King Wulfharth was called Shaw's Tongue and Ysmir, Dragon of the North." So that's the explanation for 2 of his nicknames. And you may know that Ysmir gets, as in Dragon of the North, is a title that others have had, such as the sort of Tiber Septum Talosi. We'll get into that. And then also the last Dragonborn. So essentially, I guess like a Dragonborn almost title, kind of. But Ysmir, so a few great Nordic heroes.
And Dragon of the North, meaning, I guess, originally from Atmora, right?
Yeah.
Like Dragon of Atmora or something like that.
Yeah. So,
yeah. I guess we can move on to Kine's song. That basically covers, because there's the 5 songs of Wulfharth.
Yeah.
And that basically covers Shaw's tongue.
Yeah.
So he then goes on to fight the Eastern Orcs.
Yeah.
And basically destroy their chief by supposedly shouting them into hell, which I think is pretty cool, or shouting them into oblivion.
Yeah.
And then he does a bunch of other stuff like rebuild. I don't know why that's significant. Rebuild the 418th step of High Hrothgar. Like, that's a massive deal, but it's got to be put in there. Well, it had been damaged by a dragon. And supposedly swallowed a thundercloud to keep his army from catching cold. And so he was called the Breath of Kine. I have a feeling that, I mean, it could be true, but it could just be like a clear skies shout. Like he shouts and the clouds kind of disappear. And it's like, it kind of looks like he swallowed it. It's cooler if he swallowed it.
I love so much more the way that the 36 Lessons describes them with the Thum. And the Thum sounds like this really otherworldly cool power. And the idea in here too, it's in the same sort of tone as swallowing a thundercloud sounds way more epic than just clear skies. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But what's relevant there too is he got the name Breath of Kine, which is also a name that was used for Morahouse as well. The demigod, man bull, son of Kine. So interesting little... Kine plays. Remember, guys, if you're not familiar, we should probably establish this now for those who need a quick jog of the memory. But Shor is the equivalent to Lorcan or Shazar in the Imperial Pantheon, and Shor is like the big chieftain of the Nordic Pantheon. But he was killed in the war against the Elven gods, and then he resides in Sovngarde, and he's accruing soldiers and so on. But Kine is the wife of Shor, well, now widow of Shor. So Kine plays a really important part in Nordic mythology, unlike the Kinnereth of, say, like Cyrodiil is just like, oh yeah, one of the divines. But the importance in Kine's very, very important. And also, Kine was the one who was said to have taught the Nords the Thum. Now,
and breathed them onto the throat of the world in the first place.
Exactly, yeah.
Like literally giving them life in their mythology.
And then later lore, like from the time of Skyrim, says that that Parthenax taught Nords the Thum. And I guess the cope is afterwards is that Kine taught, instructed Parthenax to do so and showed him another way to teach them, or a combination of both. It doesn't really matter all too much.
I suppose we could. Oh, what were you gonna say?
I mean, I was gonna say that with that context, it's like anytime you get Pelennor as well as Wulfharth get kind of lumped into this this title of Shezarene. The idea of it's kind of like an aspect of Shor, Shezar, or Lorcan, however you want to see it, and that's why these figures are always really anti-Mer. So we're gonna get to it soon, but you don't normally associate the Heart of Lorcan. You're thinking about the relationship between the Dwemer and the Chimer. But if you imagine that, Shor had his heart ripped out by one of the elven gods who happens to be the god of orcs now, Trinomac or Malakath, the Heart of Lorcan is really important to the Nords, just as well as orcs being an enemy of Nords. Is not just a geographical thing. It's like elves and orcs being against Nords is very much like ingrained in their deep mythology.
Yeah. One other thing to quickly mention, just because you brought up Pelennor, and I think in previous episodes someone was talking about remembering certain names like Hans the Fox and Harold Hairy Breeks were other names that Pelennor had gone through in like previous times in the Merethic era. But Ysmir is another one of Pellennor's names that he also used, which is just a little interesting connection. But
I guess we could actually read from the 5 songs of Wulfharth and read the Old Knocker section, because it is quite a nice text, and I think it's a shame to just kind of paraphrase it when it's just written so nicely.
Go for it.
The 3rd song of King Wulfharth tells of his death. Orke, an enemy god, and I will just interject and say Orke is like this antithetical kind of god of loans that's always a thorn in the Nord's side. So Orcay, an enemy god, had always tried to ruin the Nords, even in Atmora, where he stole their years away. Seeing the strength of King Wulfharth, Orcay summoned the ghost of Alduin, Time Eater, again. Nearly every Nord was eaten down to 6 years old. Boy Wulfharth pleaded to Shor, the dead chieftain of the gods, to help his people. Shor's own ghost then fought the Time Eater on the spirit plane, as he did at the beginning of time, and he won, and Orcay's folk, the Orcs, were ruined. As Boy Wulfharth watched the battle in the sky, he learned a new thum. What happens when you shake the dragon just so? He used this new magic to change his people back to normal. In his haste to save so many, though, he shook too many years out of himself. He grew older than the Greybeards and died. The flames of his pyre were said to have reached the hearth of Cain itself. So basically all the Nords get turned into children, including Wulfharth. But then, and this is another reason I was kind of hinting at earlier about him potentially being Dragonborn, is he was able to not only use the thumb well, but teach himself a new shout just by watching Alduin in the sky. And then, I say reverse age, but he's re-aging, I guess, all the Nords and himself, but himself too far.
Yeah.
And then dies.
It's an interesting connection there too with, like, you know, what happens when you shake the dragon just so, you know, somewhat referring to the time god like Akatosh, or in their case like Alduin or whatnot, but all the same sort of, you know what I mean, like Akka or whatnot. But how that, like, it's interesting that they also used, you know, the ghost of Alduin to eat down the age of the Nords. It seems like, you know what, it's all related to time, essentially. Like time and dragons are connected power. But Orky or Orcay or whatever, I guess that would make more sense too, is interesting because he's the one represented by the snake, but is thought to be a combination of Malakath and Arcay. So, like, aspects of both, which you don't really get too often with Daedra and Aedra aspects mixed into sort of one interpretation, which is interesting.
That is interesting, isn't it?
I can't think of another example, but I feel like there could be.
Maybe, but I can't think of it off the top of my head either.
But
I can think of Aedra kind of mixed together, but not Aedra and a Daedra.
I do also love that, like, this curse was also thrown onto the nearby orcs, which explains what cuts their lifespan down to men.
Yes, because orcs were said to have lived long, kind of like elves did.
Which makes sense.
But they... So that's pretty cool. And one of the most interesting things about Wulfharth is no matter how much he dies, he seems to return.
Yeah.
So the next song of Wulfharth is the Ash King. Drew, would you like to read the Ash King? Everyone loves Drew's voice.
Give me the longest one. Did you? Okay, well, there's going to be a lot to unpack with this one, so to speak.
We'll unpack it afterwards. All right.
The fourth song of King Wulfharth tells of his rebirth. The dwarves and devils, so Khyma, of the Eastern Kingdoms had started to fight again, and the Nords hoped they might reclaim their ancient holdings there because of it. They planned an attack, but then gave up, knowing that they had no strong king to lead them. Then in walked the Devil of Dagoth, who swore he came in peace. Moreover, he told the Nords a wondrous thing. He knew where the heart of Shor was. Long ago, the chief of the gods had been killed by elven giants, so, you know, Trinomac ripping out his heart and Auriel fastening on his bow. And they ripped out Shor's heart and used it as a standard to strike fear into the Nords. This worked until Ysgramor shouted some sense, and the Nords fought back again. Knowing that they were going to lose eventually, the elven giants hid the heart of Shor, so that the Nords might never have their god back. But here was the Devil of Dagoth with good news. The dwarves and devils of the Eastern Kingdom had his heart, and this was the reason for their recent unrest. The Nords asked the Devil of Dagoth why he might betray his country Merceau, and he said that the devils have betrayed each other since the beginning of time, and this was so, and so the Nords believed him. The tongues sung Shor's ghost into the world again. Shor gathered an army as he did of old, and then he sucked in the long-strewn ashes of King Wulfharth and remade him, for he needed a good general. But the Devil of Dagoth petitioned to be that general too, and he pointed out his role as the blessed harbinger of this holy war. So Shor had two generals, the Ash King and the Devil of Dagoth, and he marched on the Eastern Kingdoms with all the sons of Skyrim.
Yeah. Nicely done.
I guess just to quickly point out a few things, it's like, so the tongues, if people don't know, that is basically thumb users, like ancient, powerful Nordic thumb users. So the tongues in that regard. And obviously, like Ash King, there's this recurring theme of him going to Ashes, like after the old knocker, comes back alive, and he comes back alive a few times throughout history. So this is why he's called the Ash King. But yeah, so this is all related to the War of the First Council. So this is when the Dwemer and the Keimer, so Indor and Erevar and Dumak Dwarf King, are at odds. They don't like the profane misuse of the Heart of Lorkhan, and they get in a fight about it. And like we said, remember there was the big Nordic Empire that spread over Morrowind. So the Nords were like, oh, this is sweet, let's try and retake it while they're in civil strife. And then that's the short of what's happening here. But it's interesting because this story pulls Dagoth into it quite a bit, and his involvement with the Nords, and as he was the one coming to the Nords. And like you mentioned earlier, Drew, about the Heart of Lorkhan being, it's going to be super significant to them, because essentially to them, it's the Heart of Shor, like I said. So, of course, they would love to revive the chieftain of their own pantheon and
It's weird seeing Dagoth's involvement like this. It's like he really was playing every side. If this is to be believed, it's, he's a cheeky one.
It is interesting that they can just sing Shor's ghost into the world as well. Like, if we really need to, we can do it, and they decided it was worth it then. I do find the thumb and tongues and stuff interesting in the sense of, I always wonder what happens when they just speak normal sentences. Like, it just sends everyone flying or something. I assume the default is for Srodar, right? Like a kind of unrelenting force shout
or something. Yeah. Well,
they wouldn't just speak and turn everyone to ice, for example.
Well, that's the thing. I guess it's once again the old law versus new. Like the older law made it seem sort of vague thing, like Wulfharth had to be bound. The Greybeards, like you kind of get a little bit of it. You know how the three of the Greybeards don't speak unless they're doing the big. The only one you speak to is Arangir, or I forgot his name.
Can't you just go and speak to them?
I think they stay mute the entire time, unless during the big chants they'll say the dragon language stuff. But yeah.
I don't know about that. I feel like I can just remember going and trying to talk to one of them, and they just say a line or something.
I think
maybe they don't.
Maybe I don't think they do.
Could be a created memory. It's been a long time
Mandela
since
effect.
Look, High Hrothgar, when you've played Skyrim so many times, is a place you tend to try and get in and out of as quick as you possibly can.
Because it's Skyrim that kind of pushes the idea that using the thumb, using the tongues, like the tongues using the thumb, is speaking the dragon language. Is that always? Yeah, that's just Skyrim.
Before it was just a power from Kine, basically, that was unique to the Nords. So that will help anyone. If you're looking at lore, check if it comes from before the time of Skyrim. If it's from before the time of Skyrim, it's written as if it was unrelated to the dragons. Post Skyrim, it's obviously all like the dragon language now. So
let's see what they do with sword singers, eh?
Yeah.
Let's have a look. But I guess we could move on to Red Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, I guess just to catch them up to speed, as much as we read the Ash King song, Shor's ghost comes into the world, and then he basically remakes King Wulfharth.
Yeah.
So Wulfharth's back in the game.
Yeah.
So Red Mountain.
Oh, and also just to give it a little extra this
nugget of
is
truth.
just to see where you're at in the timeline. This is around year 700 of the first era, where this.
So 200 years approximately. After
so
the first song.
Yeah, Wulfharth goes down at 533. So then,
all right.
just under 200.
Red
years.
Mountain. The fifth song of King Wulfharth is sad. The survivors of the the survivors of the disaster came back under a red sky. That year is called Sun's Death. The devil of Dagoth had tricked the Nords, for the Heart of Shor was not in the Eastern Kingdoms, and had never been there at all. As soon as Shor's army had got to Red Mountain, all the devils and dwarves fell upon them. Their sorcerers lifted the mountain and threw it onto Shor, trapping him underneath Red Mountain until the end of time. They slaughtered the sons of Skyrim, but not before King Wulfharth killed King Dumalakath, the dwarf orc, and doomed his people. Then Vek, the devil, blasted the Ash King into hell, and it was over. Later, Kine lifted the ashes of Ysmir into the sky, saving him from hell and showing her sons the color of blood when it is brought by betrayal, and the Nords will never trust another devil again.
I like how that's the nice little, like, while they'll never trust Dunmer and also the hatred and so on, it's built into their mythology and why they think they're all, little liars.
I should have had Drew read that one. My tongue got tied. I definitely wouldn't be a good thumb user, would I? Wouldn't be good at it.
There's a few areas where this kind of gets unusual because it's, even in this text, it's not the only description of what exactly happened there. But I mean, I remember we brought it up in the last episode on the Iceberg podcast that it is weird that he's referred to as King Dumalakath the Dwarf Orc, because associating dwarves with orcs is kind of unusual, and I guess there may be more evidence to support it, but like the way I interpret that a lot of the times is just orcs kind of being a general term that that Nords might use sometimes to just state their enemies. And this Dumak especially, well, I mean, it's more Kagranak, but the dwarves in general, they have this obsession with the Heart of Lorkhan. And, Trinimac is the one that ripped it out in the first place and stole it. And now the dwarves kind of covered it and they guard it jealously. And I wonder if the Nords back then did associate them with orcs purely because they were hoarding his heart.
But what do you think about Dumalakath then? Like, because that's like clearly it's like combination of Dumak and Malakath put into one. Like, because that's like attributing it to a certain god.
I guess it's just the fact that he's. I mean, like, unless there's some theories about him somehow, like Dumak actually being somewhat like Malakath. To me, it's more of a situation of like he's the leader of the Dwemer, and the Dwemer stole Shaw's heart. So I don't know, but I mean that it hardly answers the question.
The only thing too is because if you go to the fourth song too, it does say they say the dwarves and the devils of the Eastern Kingdoms. Like they make the distinction between the Chimera and Dwemer.
So they didn't call them like orcs and the devils.
And they do refer to Eastern orcs in the second song too. So it is a strange one because they do, like they obviously know the three distinctions between the three, types. So.
Maybe Dumak was half orc.
Perhaps it's really odd, but then again, I mean, they have their mythology maybe does like to boil things down and simplify it a bit, like in Orki being a combination of Malakath and Arche. Maybe it's another sort of example of that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like it's a bit of a stretch, but in the real world, like orc means something very specific now. But if you take it all the way back to Old English, it means like, a spectre or a devil or, something kind of like gross and evil, like a devouring monster. So maybe orc is used in a more like a less defined way in these times with the old Nords.
Well, here's an interesting connection for you. Malakath has Volendrong as his artifact.
True. Well, imagine this. Imagine, but here we go. Let's work with this a little bit. Let's imagine, you got Malakath, whose origin story is basically, let's just say, eaten and defeated by Boethia, shat out and turned into Malakath. So you got Trinimac becoming Malakath. Obviously, he wouldn't be too fond of that, and who did that to him. Imagine if this Dumak Dwarf King or Dumalakath Dwarf King maybe is some form of like, not possessed or even is him, but maybe if it is like a sort of Malakath figure, maybe Malakath had something to do with the dwarves or even driving them to fight the Chimera and so on. Like maybe somehow Malakath interfered because he would have reason to do so to get revenge on the people that would follow Veloth, if that makes sense.
I feel like we've only started humouring this theory recently, and there's already like we can find connections. So this could be like a big video soon.
Look, here's something I will say, which is kind of interesting as well. The 5 songs does say this Nerevar is the son of Boethia, one of the strongest Patamaics, and that's down the bottom section there, which is interesting because later on Boethia has duelled with Trinimac and mated Malakath, but the interactions of Nerevar and Dumak later.
Yeah.
Like, there's some weird tie-ins, isn't there?
Yeah, it has to kind of be fleshed out, and it's going to get a little bit more confusing in a second, because there's basically this secret song of Wulfharth Ash King, which talks about the truth at Red Mountain. So what you just read, that fifth song, is basically according to
the 5 songs, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the secret song, which...
Do you want me to... I'll read it. So the truth at Red Mountain, the heart of Shor was in Resdane, as Dagoth had promised. As Shor's armies approached the westernmost bank of the inner sea, they stared across at Red Mountain, where the Dwemer armies had gathered. News from the scouts reported that the Chimeri forces had just left Narcissus, and that they were taking their time joining their cousins against the Nords. Dagoth said that the tribunal had betrayed their king's trust, that they sent Dagoth to Lorcan, for that is what they called Shor in Resdane, so that the god might wreak vengeance on the dwarves for their hubris, that Nerevar's peace with the Dwemer would be the ruin of the Velothi way. This was the reason for the slow muster, Dagoth said. So...
I mean, we do know the heart of Shor was in Resdane.
Yeah, so this is... Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. And...
Fact.
And Dagoth said the tribunal had betrayed their king's trust. So it seems that at this point, this positions Dagoth being aware of the tribunal's betrayal. And they sent Dagoth to Lorcan. But this, it goes further. So do you want to keep reading, or do you want to... Anything else to unpack?
Well, I'll just quickly, for those who don't know, like Narcissus's position from Vardenfell. Narcissus is like on the mainland, like down... in kind of the middle of the curve, so it's quite far south of the island.
So the armies...
One thing to add there, which is like, you know, if you're... This is getting into some like heavy conjecture, but if you're looking at Nerevar as the son of Boethia and then Ju Malakath, so essentially like a meeting of Malakath and Boethia, and you've got Nerevar's peace with the Dwemer would be the ruin of the Velothi way, and the foundation of the Velothi way is Boethia and the other good Daedra telling everyone about Trinamac's lies and saying, no, don't listen to this guy. This is the way we do things. And Malakath is the remnants of Trinamac. So I guess it is the antithesis of the Velothi way, as we're kind of hinting at, but it does kind of make more and more sense as you think about it. But go on.
Yeah, good stuff. So the armies grow, and Lorcan, I won't keep going saying what they called Lorcan Shor. So, and Lorcan said, I do not wreak vengeance on the dwarves for the reasons that the tribunal might believe I do. Nevertheless, it is true that they will die by my hand, and any whoever should side with them. That was the end of the sentence. I was reading as if it was going on. This Nerevar is the son of Boethia, one of the strongest Padomaics. He is a hero to his people despite his tribunal, and he shall muster enough that this battle will be harder going still. We will need more than what we have, and so Dagoth who wanted the dwarves as dead as the tribunal did, went to Cogoran and summoned his house Chapthil, his Nyx hounds, his wizards, his archers, his stolen men of brass. And that's like animunculi, like Dwemer animunculi. And the Ash King Wulfharth, hoary Ysmir, went and made peace with the orcs in spite of his Nordic blood, and they brought many warriors but no wizards at all. Many Nords could not bring themselves to ally with their traditional enemies, even in the face of Red Mountain. They were close to desertion. Then Wulfharth said, don't you see where you really are? Don't you know who Shor really is? Don't you know what this war is? And they looked from the king to the god to the devils and orcs, and some knew, really knew, and they were the ones that stayed. Oh.
So what did they really know?
Well, I think it's all referencing the kind of like what Shor being Lorcan, the kind of the importance, like it's the biggest metaphysical war, I guess, there. Like, for example, it's far beyond this like moment here, is far beyond just, I don't like orcs and elves and so on. Like, this is really about, like,
But didn't they know that? Or I guess not, because Dagoth obviously didn't get up and speak to every single Nord and say, hey, the heart of Shor's over here.
Yeah, well, let's just clarify again, this again. So we've got it's basically you've got Team Nerevar with, Shor and Wulfharth alongside the Sixth House, basically following Dagoth, and then he's got his whole house. And then Wulfharth also went and made peace with the orcs, bringing them into the fold. So it seems to be Chimer and Dwemer versus... Or I'm sorry, Chimer and Dwemer versus Nords, orcs, sixth house, and yeah, like sure, and like so yeah, it's a fun.
This is some Avengers Endgame like stuff, isn't it? It's all the members are there for the final battle.
Yeah,
but there's gods.
So let's like break down each philosophy of each one. So we kind of know where like Dagoth stands somewhat, but let's put the simplest ones then. We've got Nords and Pro-Shore group and Wulfharth group. Then you've also got orcs being they would be like pro-Malakath, and so they wouldn't have a favorable opinion, I guess, of what happened to them as at the hands of Boethiah or so on. They would be anti-Boethiah somewhat, and the followers, right? Mm-hmm. And then I guess and you've got the sixth house. He's got his little fingies dipped in a lot of pies. But
his milk fingers.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like I guess at the end of the day, however you look at who's like the allegiances to any side, the side that Wulfharth and the Nords are fighting on is the side that's not going to be tampering with the Heart of Shore. At the end of the day, it can boil down to that regardless of who survives and who hates who, protecting Shore's heart is the fundamental, most important goal. Yeah. And everything else is secondary.
Well, because the ultimate goal here, and I guess the importance that Ysmir is trying to pull, tell the other Nords is like, this is kind of their chance to rebuild or revive Shore and let them have ultimate dominance over the world. Because that's the only reason they've, it's because Shore's heart's... Though it gets kind of weird when you consider like Shore's heart's built, or Lorkhan's heart's built to sustain the world, and his death... Do you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of... Let's not go into that part.
Let's read the Doom Drum.
Yeah.
So, Nerevar carried Keening, a dagger made of the sound of the shadow of the moons. His champions were Dumak, Dwarf King, who carried a hammer of divine mass, and Elandro Sul, who was the immortal son of Azura and wore the Wraith Mail. They met Lorkhan at the last battle of Red Mountain. Lorkhan had his heart again, but he had long been from it and he needed time. Wulfharth met Sul, but could not strike him, and he fell from grievous wounds, but not before shouting Sul blind. Dagoth met Dumak and slew him, but not before Sunder struck his lord's heart. Nerevar turned away from Lorkhan and struck down Dagoth in rage, but he took a mortal wound from Lorkhan in turn. But Nerevar feigned the death that was coming early, and so struck Lorkhan with surprise on his side. The heart had been made solid by Sunder's tuning blow, and Keening could now cut it out. And it was cut out, and Lorkhan was defeated, and the whole ordeal was thought over.
This is very strange too, when you kind of...
It reads like the end of a Shakespeare, where this person killed that person and this one that one, and you're not sure exactly. It'd be easier with a video, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well,
a visual depiction of it.
So you got Nerevar with Keening, one of the tools of Kagranak. So this is, instead of the whole Red Mountain ideas, the classical ideas where you've got like Kagranak using all of the tools by himself, right? You've kind of got the dwarves here and the Chimer in an alliance together, and they're all kind of using the tools. So you've got Nerevar's got Keening, Dumak Dwarf King, the Hammer of Divine Mass being Sunder, and Elandro Sul, who is Nerevar's shield companion, or I forgot the exact phrasing, Wraith Mail being Wraithguard, the other component. So they're each wielding one of the three tools, which are used to the Kagranak design to manipulate the heart. But Lorkhan, it seemed that they got to the heart, and Lorkhan has got his heart again, so it's all there, and Lorkhan's kind of there ready to fight, but he needed time. He's still like kind of recovering, and this is when you have Wulfharth and Dagoth sort of fighting alongside Lorkhan against... It's weird because they're kind of trying to stop Nerevar and stuff, who seemingly want to chop the heart, but it's odd because I'm more inclined to believe like the Chimer view of things, when it kind of, the classical Red Mountain stories where you have...
I was pretty much going to say that like this is an interesting interpretation, but I don't think this would be how it all happened. It's too crazy. Like the idea that, this is like this is in the heart chamber at the center of the Citadel. It's going to be the last place for a big battle. It's like if the Nords are pushing, it would be a big deal if they made it that deep into At that point, they're pretty much going to win the war if they've made it all the way there. I imagine that they got stopped, and Kagranak was kind of alone in the heart chamber, or practically alone when he did it. I personally buy into that more, but this kind of builds up that mythos of Wulfharth that you could say that if he's just kind of a shadow of Shaw himself, then he's kind of there because the heart of Lorkhan's there without actually necessarily being there in person, like metaphorically speaking. But
it also seems weird that Nerevar would be opposed, I guess, to Lorkhan inherently or something. Like, not like, for example, I can imagine him like he said, he didn't want to tamper with the heart, but I wouldn't necessarily him being anti-Lorkhan. Do you know what I mean? Especially since Boethia, for example, speaks so favorably of Lorkhan. Like, I can imagine Boethia would be very pro-Lorkhan coming back because, she professed love for him and stuff before. Like,
and it sets up the whole betrayal, of the betrayal of Nerevar at the hands of the tribunal is because he didn't want them to attune the heart.
I was just wondering who wrote the secret song, because it's written quite differently to the first 5, almost like someone else added it on.
Yeah.
Like, for example, Lorkhan. Lorkhan is only mentioned after the secret song. Like, it's always, like, Shaw before that.
Yeah.
Like, everything is Shaw.
I guess it still seems like it's written by a NORD, just in the way they go.
And then it goes Lorkhan.
Because they say Lorkhan for what is that is what they called Shaw and Resdane. So that's kind of like there's like that clarification.
It's still interesting though that it suddenly, it does just feel like something changed, like different person just wrote this. Actually, here's what happened.
Well, plus it also does say at the very top, it says, underneath the 5 songs of King Wulfharth, it says a summary of 5 epic songs plus an apocryphal song. So, you can't really rely on it.
Now, the other thing to throw out here is, there is the idea that with the striking of the heart, and kind of the birth of the Numidium, really, where when the dwarves all disappeared and everything, that there was this. It's called often cited as like the red moment, which is this big dragon break, which opens the potential for this to be true and other stories to be true as well. All and then they all get kind of. The Jills, I guess, come and fix it up and make it into a normal timeline again afterwards. But you're reconciling contradictory series of events and so on. But I'm not 100% sold on it. And I feel like this is the only way it really gets any credence.
I mean, this is the thing about Wulfharth, and he's involved in so many things that don't have clear answers. And so it's very easy to feel confused about it because it is there's no this is the correct answer. Everyone's got their own theory about it. I mean, there's the Arcturian Heresy, which is another text which talks about Wulfharth and says all kinds of other things. And it's all magic as well. It's not like as easy as just talking about a single mortal person because, well, he dies again and comes back, and if we believe that Vivek shouted him into ash again, and then his ashes were carried away, there's then an epilogue section basically where Wulfharth comes stumbling out of red mountains to earthquakes and a land on fire, which is Sun's death, as you were saying, and then turns into ashes again.
Yeah, well...
and the winds take him back to Skyrim.
Yeah, well, it's interesting there that, Vec the Devil being there, so that's kind of more coinciding with the 36 Lessons interpretation of the whole thing. So where, there is a divine being like Vec, as in, he was there. At this time, if you were just following the, chronological timeline, Vivek, as in a powerful god or anything, doesn't really exist at this point because it's after the events that he, achieves apotheosis with the whole, using the heart of Lorkhan. However, in the 36 Lessons, it's told that, he was born from, Netchman's wife and was thrown into the sea of dregs and impregnated, all that kind of weird stuff that brings upon this divine creation of Vec. Unless it is just referring to him as a... just a powerful guy that beat Wulfharth, but I just don't really think Vivek pre-God would be that powerful. I don't that could beat Wulfharth. Like you're blasting the Ash King into by hell. They often mean just it's like oblivion in the same way they're using devil for Keimer. But yeah. So anyway, what we can do is we can leave off the end of this story anyway, where Kyne lifts the ashes of Ysmir into the sky, saves him from oblivion, and then brings him back to a good place. He's in good hands, right? So now we've left that part of the story. And the big next piece we get to, and I guess this is what a lot of people... well, actually, we're not up to the Arcturian Heresy yet, because we do have...
about
someone wants to take it,
2,700 years later, in the events of ESO, so Second Era, 580-ish era, we've got the second invasion, the second Akaviri invasion, where Wulfharth is summoned once again, to... So that's the big. It's like it almost seems like he's a personification of any struggles that involve Nords. Where you can almost like conveniently, the plot continues without him a lot of the times, but he's just there representing their spirit. But
I can give you the. Sorry, if you want to.
No, go on.
I was just saying. So you've got the Dur Kamal guy, that was coming in with the Akaviri invasion. He just basically blows through Windhelm. And Joran Skald King, who wasn't king at this time, but he basically tried to stop the Akaviri and get revenge and so on. But he goes up to the Greybeards, and I'll read this passage. Wounded and devastated, Joran barely escaped the sack of Windhelm alive. Feeling for the first time the responsibility of his royal birth, he decided to appeal to the Greybeards for aid, and so made his way stealthily but quickly to High Hrothgar. For reasons that had not been divulged, the Greybeards decided to teach the Skald Prince a thum, one that summons a hero from Sovngarde to fight for the tongue who uses it. But in Joran's voice, the thum became a royal call of valor, and the summoned hero was none other than Wulfharth, the Ash King. So, and then together with Wulfharth, they go off, and then this is where they're chasing the Akaviri army, and then they chase it into Morrowind, and Argonian Shellbacks show up, all that kind of stuff, right?
And the Ebonheart Pact is made.
But basically, once the Akaviri line was broken and they were driven into the sea, where they drowned by the thousands, the Ash King, his purpose fulfilled, returned to Sovngarde, and in realm, and then later, Joran is crowned king 3 weeks later. So that was the Ash King. He showed up again, but that's about it. Like, there's nothing too much more to talk about him here.
And I guess then you move into the stories from the Arcturian Heresy, which is a very controversial book.
Which I think Kirkbride has even said
so much stuff.
I think Kirkbride's even said it's his least favorite of his writings.
I looked into that a bit more actually, and it seemed to me that he actually likes the content of the book. And when he said it was his worst, he means like just the style of writing. Because if you read it, it's actually. I mean, like me personally, I'm not a massive fan of reading it. It seems to be like lots of extremely small sentences. Like, with his god destroyed, Wulfharth finds it hard to keep his form. He staggers out of Red Mountain to the battlefield beyond. The world has shaken, and all of Morrowind is made of fire. A strong gale picks up and blows his ashes back to Skyrim.
It's like cramming tons
it's like that,
of info.
It's that constantly.
Which
is very effective to get a lot of information across. It's almost like when you read a character bio versus a backstory,
If people want to know, the conventional idea, obviously, is that there's this Talos of Atmora, there's this powerful Nord character who becomes General Talos to King Culhwch, who was uniting the Clovian estates, and, he used his thumb to blow down the gates at Senkator and all kinds of cool stuff. So he's this powerful thumb user, right? And he goes on to become Tiber Septim, and then because he's so great, he ascends to become Talos as a god among the divines. Now, that's the conventional tale that, the Temple of Divines would tell you, or any Nord would tell you. But the Arcturian Heresy is essentially the idea that it's basically there's multiple people responsible for all of these grand events. So Hjalti Earlybeard was a Breton from the island of Aclair, is it? Or Alcair? Or Alcair? Alcair. And, he wanted to, get busy, and he joined up with Culhwch, but basically the idea is that he got access to Ysmir and basically resurrected and could somewhat control Ysmir and use him as all of the shout feats that you see done, like him blowing down the gates of Sanctor and all of this crazy cool stuff, is actually in the reality of the Arcturian Heresy. It was Ysmir Wulfharth doing it, the ghost of Ysmir Wulfharth doing it under the control of like Hjalti Earlybeard, and then there's also another powerful Imperial battle mage called Zurin Arctus there, and the idea is that more or less these three beings make up Talos, like a divine oversoul, rather than it just being this like apotheosis of Tiber Septim. So it's that's why it is called a heresy, because it is very heretical to say, especially to a Nord, that Talos of Atmora is.
We've lost Michael, but do go on. There you go, he's back.
That's all right. I just cut
Zero
off.
Psalmed.
You good?
Yep.
Yeah. That Talos of Atmora is in fact a Breton who also abused and took credit for Ysmir Wulfharth's powers and feats, and then obviously we know the bits and pieces around like him organizing the assassination of King Kulakane and slitting his own throat, so to take eyes away from him, so it looks like he was just collateral in there, but then he became king in Tiber Septim eventually, an emperor, and started the Third Empire. But then there is this undead entity called the Underking, which is a big part of the Daggerfall storyline, and he's been running around and doing like bits and pieces throughout the Third Era, throughout the Septim Dynasty, and obviously Daggerfall is like much later, like 400 years or something around that, into the Septim Dynasty. But the Underking is a figure of great debate, because there are sources that can basically be used to construct the story that the Underking is Zurin Arctus, and then there is ones that construct the story to say that he is Ysmir Wulfharth, and then there's some that kind of do the ones which feels a little sillier to me, I don't know, just on vibes, that there are actually both of them at different times, and it kind of gets a little contrived. Michael, you sent this picture before, and I'll put it up, and it's kind of it's not quite a Venn diagram, but it's a
three pairs in Talos. So it's got the Underking, and it's got color over Ysmir and Zoran, Mantella over Hjalti and Zoran, Tiber Septim with Hjalti and Ysmir, and Talos with all three.
Yeah, so you can kind of understand the concept. So like Underking being both Ysmir and Zoran there, like, or speculated to be either, and if you combine Ysmir and Hjalti, you get the Talos Storm Crown with the big shouts and all of that kind of stuff that makes him seem so grand. And then obviously,
I might need some more clarification on the Mantella one.
Yeah,
having Hjalti there.
Well, I'm not seeing the image at the moment, but like the Mantella story gets a bit interesting. It's kind of, I feel like that is the moment where things who is who really starts to become hazy, because you've got Tiber Septim, who signs the armistice with Morrowind to be at peace, but they also take the Numidium, but they don't have a Heart of Lorkhan to power it. So they come up with this idea. Well, Zurin Arctus comes up with this idea of creating a Mantella, which is essentially like a god tier soul gem, basically, and it kind of relies on the idea that Wulfharth is, as we said at the start, like a Shezarene, an aspect of Shor, so that theoretically, if you power it with Wulfharth, then you've got kind of like a Heart of Lorkhan, but
that's why the diagram confuses me, because it hasn't got Ysmir in the red circle when it says the Mantella. But like, I agree with what you're saying.
See, I almost think like whether you consider it Hjalti or Tiber Septim, but this doesn't quite make sense. But I almost feel like he is like absolutely entwined in what goes on here as well. Like the idea that basically you've got Zurin Arctus turns the Mantella as like a giant soul gem on Wulfharth and sucks up his soul or whatever it does, but at the same time Wulfharth kills Zurin Arctus by like stabbing him through the chest essentially, and then you've got Tiber Septim who just stumbles in on it and kind of like tries to play it off as some heresy or so, some moment of betrayal. But I feel like the fact that you've got these three kind of like transcending into the same god That at this moment, all of them were essentially one, and who the Underking is, who Tiber Septim is, and what's powering the Mantella is all a mishmash at this point. That none of it really makes sense, and it's all like.
Well, I've heard the theory that Zuranactus and Wulfharth or Ysmir's soul went into the Mantella in that moment. It's a theory.
Well, and I feel like the idea that Tiber Septim would be away from that, to me at least, kind of almost doesn't make sense, because I feel like it relies on the three of them being crammed together to essentially make the god.
Well, that's why
Talos.
Because originally there's also the idea that basically when he was using Tiber Septim was using the Numidium to basically with the siege of Alinor, basically nuke Somerset and so on. At the same time, he was use that dragon break to kill lots of royal families off that weren't 100% loyal to Tiber Septim, and Zurin Arctus had a big disagreement. And there was something like when basically Tiber Septim killed Zurin Arctus in there. There was a big fight, a conflict there, which I don't know exactly how that stacks up. I mean, to me, I like that kind of motivation. Just I like Tiber Septim as a really lying, conniving, like get what he wants, going from Hjalti early beard building himself up to this Tiber Septim emperor.
Even taking on this Nordic or Atmoran kind of name like Talos.
Yeah.
It's not his name.
But then there is that
the crowds will like it.
There's that weird thing too where Talos isn't really a god until after the miracle of peace, and it kind of retroactively kind of becomes a god in the way that because I think it was that so whether it is Ysmir or Zurin's soul or whatnot in the Mantella, they had to get the Mantella in Daggerfall. I can't remember. Do you destroy it or whatever happens with it, but basically that only after that and the Numidium is activated again does the soul of Ysmir or Zurin, whoever's in the Mantella, gets out and united so that it can become part of this Talos Oversoul. And that's where Talos is created.
Well.
Right,
okay. But then so retroactively, Talos has kind of like always existed, and then that's when the jungle kind of stuff happens and gets kind of contrived and silly.
Because that's the idea of the Underking anyway, is that, and why people aren't sure who it is. It's just the idea that the Underking wants to reclaim his heart from the Mantella so that he can finally die.
Yeah. I'm more inclined to, I don't know. I'm inclined to believe Zurin more so. It's Zurin, but then again, it makes more sense that Ysmir's heart or power or soul or whatever is in the Mantella because, him being associated with Shaw and, could be a Shezarene or whatnot. But, it gets complicated, but there's cool theories. But ultimately, the good thing about this is all you need to know is that Talos exists, and Hjalti Earlybeard did some shady stuff to get there.
Thalmor. Talos exists.
Talos is real. But outside of that, surprisingly, he doesn't really appear in the stories again. Ysmir Wulfharth as a character, like he's not really relevant to the rest of history going forward, but. Ultimately, he's, in a bite-sized little chunk, he was this super powerful tongue who became High King of Skyrim, brought back the Nordic pantheon, did lots of cool mythological feats. When he died, he was revived again multiple times to help the Nords out, and until he was abused and put in a gem, I guess, and then sort of became part. Well, I guess he can't really come back again, because he's part of the Talos Oversoul really now. So
I should mention, which is what I was going to say before. It was said that when Wulfharth's soul was transferring to the Mantella, so if Zurin tricked him and put a soul trap spell on him and then he was killed, that the actual soul transferring to the Mantella tore a hole through Arctus's chest, killing him.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's from the Arcturian Heresy. So.
Yeah. Well, there you go. That's what happened to Ysmir Wulfharth is 1/3 of Talos, and that's about it.
That's about it. He's
a goner. That's what Ysmir Wulfharth is. But yeah, I don't know if there is anything else to actually say on him. Very mythological figure. And I guess I think he was the first reference of Ysmir, like with the title Dragon of North, but Dragon of the North. But Tiber Septim gets that title, and I guess that kind of makes sense since Ysmir was doing all of the things anyway. But
it is funny when you look at one of Kirkbride's writings, because obviously they say Wulfharth is a Shezarene, like a avatar of Shor, and it kind of starts spelling. Oh, does it spell Lorcan? It doesn't. It's like
Almost.
Wulfharth L, Hjalti O, Ysmir R, Talos K. But hold on, where are these letters coming from?
Yeah, was this where was this written down by Kirkbride? Was it just like a forum? Yeah, it was just like an answer to a question in a
Probably.
forum, right? So
Anyway, it starts spelling out Lorcan, and it kind of looked like an acrostic poem until I realized that none of the letters are actually like the first letter of their names.
Yeah.
Anyway, it looks like there's space for one more.
Well,
he's an
yeah.
interesting character.
I think that pretty much gets the gist of it for Ysmir Wulfharth.
Alright.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone for watching. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we will see you next time to nerd out with some more Elder Scrolls.